Right, we're trying technology.
But I don't think it's very positive. Cool. Okay. Thank you for coming. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a half-hour kind of introduction to Humanitarian Toolbox and the project that I'm working on. Then anyone that isn't a developer that wants to escape, feel free to disappear at that point, and we'll spend the remaining time just code, looking at the technical side of it for anyone that wants to. I presented this talk a while back at conference. I haven't really looked at it in detail since, so apologies if I stumble my way through a few of the slides and as I see them for the first time again, but hopefully the gist will come across. You know who I am. Okay, so coding for the greater good is a term that I first heard from Richard Campbell. Richard Campbell is the founder of Humanitarian Toolbox, and he's also one of the co-hosts of .NET Rocks, if you listen to that podcast. And it was about 2012, Richard was kind of thinking around a problem that he was experiencing about how he could get developers, designers, anyone that was working in kind of software craftsmanship to contribute their time to charity in a way that really utilised their skills. So Richard was quite involved with managing teams, managing kind of groups of people and doing team building activities. And one of the things he got his teams to do was they'd go out for a day and they'd go and work on a charity like Habitat for Humanity, which is kind of like a build houses for people kind of project. And so these people would sort of go out and then do some kind of building activity on that. And that was great, but he found it a little frustrating when he saw people like, really experienced back-end developers painting fences or trying to figure out how to use the hammer correctly, when really their skills were, software development. And he thought, well, why are we not using their skills and their time towards software design for those charities instead? So he was kind of rolling this idea around and trying to think about how we'd face certain problems along the way. And one of the things that he was also thinking about at the same time was disasters. So disasters were kind of big in the news around that time, and he was thinking back even further to, this is a picture from Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And one of the aspects of Hurricane Katrina that was quite interesting was around that time, the internet had formed itself enough that there were groups of people that were able to help out with the disaster relief remotely by doing hackathons and producing bits of code to help the charities that were sort of involved in the disaster relief operations. And so, seeing those groups of people get together and do things kind of inspired some of the ideas that led to Humanitarian Toolbox. And one of the aspects of Katrina that was quite well publicised at the time was around animal rescue. So I think it was around 600,000 animals had to be abandoned by people as they kind of evacuated their homes rapidly. And after the main part of the disaster was over, that was then a big job for those animal charities to see if they could rescue the animals and then reunite them with the right owners. And that's a lot of animals to reunite. And Richard met someone that had helped during a hackathon at that time, and they built an application that was designed to do that, so they could take pictures of the animals and people that were looking for animals could give their descriptions, and hopefully they'd start to match people back up again with the right pets. And this guy was talking to Richard about the rush that he got from doing that over a few days to put a piece of software together that he knew was going to save the lives of these animals. But then he also talked about the reality that after that disaster was over, after the main bit was dealt with, those charities went back to other things, and the people that had been involved in the hackathons also kind of went back to their day jobs. And the software that they built just kind of got forgotten and lost and buried to one side. And then a few years later, a similar situation occurred, another hurricane, more animals needing to be relocated, and that charity called him up and said, could you come back and rewrite that? We can't find the code. He didn't have the code, and so he did it again. And that happened a third time. So while one benefit was he got really, really good at writing that one piece of software, it was quite frustrating. And Richard, when he was talking to him, saw that there was a real chance to be more efficient about that whole process. And that really kind of rolls around to the problem of sustainability. And the problem really is there that as developers, we're paid by Madgex to write the software, and then we can go home and forget about it. And if we decide to leave, we don't have to worry about it. It's up to Madgex to worry about how they sustain that through its lifetime with people coming and going. And, as developers, we know if we leave a project where we've had a lot of experience and expertise that we put into it, it can be vulnerable if we disappear and that knowledge goes away. So one of the problems with software is that it's not really free. And Richard says, yeah, software is free in the same way a puppy is free. I can give you a puppy, and then that's great, but then you've got to pay for its food and walk it and take it to the vet. And you've got to do all of that if you want to keep it alive, really. And so there is a commitment there. And so in 2012, when Richard was putting all these ideas together, the main goal was, produce software in a way that meant people could contribute when they had time, they could come and go, but at the end, that software was still alive and managed and kept going. And so really one of the things that helped with all of that was the advent of open source. And open source is an interesting subject. I think we're probably all reasonably familiar with open source. The people outside of the industry, it's kind of a bit of an alien thing. So there's a guy named Daniel Pink, and he made a quote that basically said, yeah, let me get this straight. So you guys, you go to work, you spend all day coding some software, you go home at night, you get home, and then you code some more software, this time for free.
Yeah.
And it's a bit weird. There's not many industries that I can think of that people are doing that and actively contributing stuff for free that's to do with what they'd be doing at work. And so this guy Daniel Pink was starting to think about what gets people into open source, why do they do it, and what are the motivations. And what he really boils it down to is that it's a creative act. Developing software is something that we can exercise our design skills, our problem-solving skills, and there's lots of different ways to solve those problems. So it's a very enjoyable act from that perspective. And that's where open source comes in, because it gives people the chance to go and do different technologies, try out new techniques and patterns that they want to do in a different environment to their day job. And people therefore kind of feel that's a really valuable use of their time to help master the skills of software development. And so with all that in mind, Humanitarian Toolbox thought, well, how can we take the motivation then of open source and bring that to this, solving this problem of software for charities? So a few of the challenges that they were kind of thinking about as they started to talk to a few charities, get some ideas. First was that dead code syndrome, which is what we've really talked about, the fact that if we write the code and someone goes away, it could die off and become useless. Certainly not something that we can build and deploy again in the future. Also, is the purpose of a charity to be writing software? They've got a number of volunteers, number of paid staff, but they've got a certain set of skills, and those skills are generally about helping people and solving the problem that their charity is designed to do. They don't want to be paying a lot of money to employ software developers to keep these systems going. So what tends to happen is they keep simple systems, a spreadsheet, or maybe post-it notes and pieces of paper, whatever gets the job done, maybe not very effectively, but what is cheap. Another issue is infrastructure. Infrastructure sort of a few years back was reasonably expensive, or a commitment. You'd have to host your own data center somewhere, you'd have to rent for long periods of time. Now we have the cloud, relatively cheap infrastructure that we can spin up and spin down, so we can spin it up during a disaster and then get rid of it again at the end, which means that we can be much more efficient with the use of that infrastructure. And then finally was access of information. So some time back, if we built all of these nice applications, that would be great, but people in the field, when the disasters actually happen, can't access the information. Nowadays, we all walk around with pretty much a computer in our pocket, and we have access to that information. We have access to the internet. Not guaranteed at a disaster site. You might not have a 3G signal. You may just about have a low bandwidth signal. So some of that might be through SMS and email, lower bandwidth technologies, but there's a way for us to get to it a little bit more effectively. That all kind of rolled up into the formation of Humanitarian Toolbox. There's a few co-founders with Richard, and in 2012 they kind of founded the idea of the company, and then in 2014 it was formally made a US 501c charity. Got executive board of directors and things, that all of the things they need there to kind of make that run as a formal charity. They then started thinking about where they wanted to focus their time, where they wanted to focus their efforts, and because of the examples of Katrina and because of other things, they wanted to focus on disaster response, because disasters are unequal opportunities destroyer. They can affect pretty much anywhere in the world. Someone could be affected by flooding or hurricanes or tornadoes, that kind of thing. So it's something that everyone can get behind as something to contribute towards. And what they really wanted to do is, let the software designers, the developers, front, back end, testers, everyone get involved with the skill sets that they have. Skill sets that are quite rare in the charity space. Ultimately, they want to help those charities do what they do more effectively, and they want to do that by providing significantly sustainable software that can go towards helping save lives. I've pulled this quote out. This came from Jim McGowan. Jim McGowan's one of the people that we work with at the American Red Cross on the allReady project. And he's got this sort of mantra really that we should focus on the outcomes and not the outputs. So the outputs would be like measures of work done. So in our world, we might measure PRs accepted and closed, or bugs fixed, that kind of thing, some kind of measure of the output that we're doing. And then the outcome would be the result of all that work. So, that could be that we've increased the conversion of job board upgrades by making some change to the UX of the platform. Outcomes in the American Red Cross are significantly more interesting. They're things like number of people they've helped, number of lives they've saved. So they're much more important things, you could argue. So that brings us on to allReady. So allReady is the project I've been working with for over 2 years now. allReady is a web app. It's an ASP application, and it's designed to improve preparedness for disasters. But just to try and explain what that means, it's around doing work in advance of disasters, may mitigate the effects, or hopefully possibly even prevent the thing in the first place. So some of the campaigns that are being used are the American Red Cross are looking to do in smoke alarm installations, because we all know smoke alarms and the early warnings they provide can save lives and get people out of the house before they're taken effect by the fire or the smoke. So allReady has been sort of sponsored by the American Red Cross. Sponsored isn't, they're not paying any money, they're not sort of involved from that respect, but they are our domain experts, they're the stakeholders of the project. They're not going to be the sole user of it eventually, but they were available. They had a use case of the fire alarm installs that then they could guide us on what it needed to do from their perspective to give us the features that we have to build. So at the moment, whenever the Red Cross, whenever there's a house fire in America, the Red Cross are usually there at the scene after the event to help out. So they might take blankets, they might take cuddly toys for children, a phone so people can get in contact with their family, might have access to sort of counselling and support. And they go and sort of help those people. And obviously that can take quite a large number of volunteers spread across the country. Fires can happen any time of day or night, any time of year. And so they need people available to go and help volunteer with that work. One of the things they say is what they'd really like to do is put disaster relief out of business entirely and move from being reactive to proactive by doing these preparedness activities where they can spend the time to prevent the need to go and do that kind of thing, and hopefully, reduce the loss of lives or the impact on people's lives, certainly. So allReady, to sort of sum it up in the early stage, allReady is being used by the Red Cross to deploy those free smoke alarms. This was a program that they had, a campaign that they had prior to allReady coming along, that they were managing a kind of mostly paper-based and landline-based system. allReady is designed to help organisations manage their campaigns more effectively. Those campaigns can be whatever they want. It's designed to do, or basically improve efficiency by improving planning. So what we want to do is going to make the whole planning process a lot more rigorous. That's including like grouping the workloads by location, trying to think about the best and optimal driving distances, where teams are based on that work. Anything we can do up front to try and get the most use out of the volunteers that they have. Next, it focuses on communication, and this is a big area that's made improvements. So this is about making sure that if things change while volunteers are out doing their installations, they get notified. They don't go waste their time going to somewhere if someone's just cancelled, for example, which is a common problem that they were facing. Also, it improves communication between the person that's requested the smoke alarm and the organisation. So they stay in touch through the process, and almost like a crap delivery services out there, but like a good delivery service, they'll text you a week before and remind you you've got this thing scheduled. On the day before, they send you a reminder, and during the process, they'll update you on that you're next in the queue, basically. And all of that's designed to make sure that people actually are there when they turn up. And then finally, it's not doing a lot of this at the moment, but the goal is that it will really track the progress of these activities. So we've got some basic sort of numbers in there at the moment. What they really want to do is feed that into measuring those outcomes. So what they want to be able to show is that in a certain area, after their campaign, there were less deaths from house fires than before they ran that campaign, maybe. that kind of measure. So one of the big improvements that we made by adding the software in when they've tested it so far is that they've actually increased the number of installs that have succeeded by around 300%, or up to 300%. So typically a team would go out and they'd try and aim for about 4 to 5 installs in a day. In the paper-based system, they tended to get 1 or 2 of those actually completed. So that was things like, people not being there, people forgetting they'd asked for it, and when the knock came on the door, they just didn't want to answer it. The people moving, changes of addresses, things that just weren't getting captured and fed back to the people who were volunteering. But when that technology comes in, some of their tests, they've got 4 out of 5 done, because when they have had to cancel them, they've diverted that resource and they've gone off and the high-level overview of kind of the main terms. This can be quite intimidating. We've kind of grown this out now over the 2.5 years. So we've evolved a lot of terminology that matches up with what the Red Cross are using. We're trying to kind of use their language for a lot of the objects in the system. Don't worry about understanding it all. If you're contributing, you'll be working in an area. You'll probably be working on a much smaller subset of this. You don't need the whole big picture. But to kind of summarize, you're going to have an organization like the Red Cross. They're going to want to run campaigns, and that might be their smoke alarm installs. It might be they know a hurricane's coming and they want to put sandbags out across houses, that kind of thing. So within that campaign, they'll have a goal maybe. They might want to install 1,000 smoke alarms in 3 months. And then they'll create the events that they plan to achieve that goal. So that might be preparing first by finding out who wants the smoke alarms, canvassing houses for who needs them. Then it might be recruiting volunteers, and then finally they'll be planning the individual installs. Within those events, they can break them down into subtasks, so they could say they need a driver on a certain day, or someone with the skill of an electrician to install the alarm, whatever that may be. And once those tasks are set up, then people can volunteer. They can say, okay, I can drive, I'm free on that day, I'd like to help with that. And that's them just kind of giving their approval that they're free on a particular day or time. Then we have the requests, that's the people that have asked for something. And finally, they manage those in what they call an itinerary. So this is kind of a grouping together of the 4 or 5 requests they plan to do, and then a team of the volunteers that are needed to go and achieve that. So that might be 1 driver, 1 installer, and 1 person to clean up afterwards, kind of thing. They put all of those itineraries together, and that's their planned workload. And if anything changes, they can drop people out of those itineraries and add other requests in and update. I've got a couple of screenshots. I won't show many because we can kind of look at the real app if we need to. The first thing, designers in, we haven't, but this looks lovely to us back-end developers. But to designers, they'll probably cringe. Oh, Tracy, you're probably cringing. It's got some issues with design and UX. It's mostly been back-end developers to date. We've put some curved corners on things to make an effort, and we bootstrap the hell out of the thing. But it functionally works. And the next phase that we're actually running now, I've got a friend of mine who's a UX designer who's spent 2 hours last weekend. We're going to spend another 2 this weekend just going through the flows, going through the functionality. He's trying to get his head around all of the different types of user and requirements here. He's already got a shed load of small things that we can hopefully tackle during the CODEATHON. And then there's some sort of bigger, maybe more systemic design issues around how we can make this clear to users that aren't technical. This screen is for managing those itineraries that I talked about. So you've got your list of your users, you can add people to the team, build up your list of requests. We do that through a map, so you can kind of just lasso a group of requests in an area. One of the main things that's helped is before they weren't really paying a huge amount of attention to where requests were. They were trying vaguely by zip code to work out where they were. But on the map, they can obviously really closely locate things and mean that they're just driving between locations. And then once they've selected those, we use the Bing Map API to actually plan the most optimal driving route between those and do as much as we can up front to make it an efficient plan, and then they can see it all on the map below. In terms of tech stack, we've tried to be pretty up there and keep current. So we're on ASP.NET Core 2.0. We're on top of .NET Core. The significance of that is that we can run on Linux, Mac, it's cross-platform. We can develop on Linux and Mac as well. So that's a really nice feature of it. We're hosting on Windows at the moment, but we could host on Linux. The code base has evolved. So this started in the very early betas of ASP.NET. I think it was called ASP.NET VNext at that point. It was a project that was built out of the 2015 Visual Studio launch. Microsoft held an event. They wanted a hackathon, and instead of just doing another Contoso app, they wanted to actually build something useful. They kind of got together and designed already. The issue that has added is that we've gone through a lot of pain during the betas. There were a lot of changes. Betas were kind of alphas, and then the release candidates were betas, and everything broke a lot. And there's some old code in there that might look a little bit fishy now if we inspect. If we ran into an issue the other day that was just because we'd done stuff before dependency injection was fully baked. Entity Framework Core, we use that for data access to the back-end SQL database. Internally, we make a lot of use out of a library called Mediator. I've used Mediator a lot now. We've introduced it on Insights. Jim's introducing it on the new product. It's basically a message, an in-process message bus or an in-process message dispatcher. So you can send command or query messages around the application. You just send a message. You don't really care what's wired up to listen for those. And then you have handlers that are going to deal with certain message types. What that's meant we can do from a code perspective is we've got a lot of single responsibility principle going on. We've decoupled a lot of code from itself. We can make changes relatively easily. Our controllers are very light. They haven't got lots of dependencies or things we don't need. Hangfire we use for scheduled tasks, again, in process of the main app. So that runs scheduled SMS messages and emails to the requesters. We use third-party services, SendGrid and Twilio for doing email and SMS. Everything's hosted in Azure. We have bucket loads of Azure because Microsoft Philanthropies, which is their charitable wing of Microsoft, have given Humanitarian Toolbox thousands of dollars of credits. That's going to change the way they think about this. Originally, this was going to be software that they could give to charities, essentially for them to host. Now they have enough credits, they can probably just host it on behalf. So we're actually taking the operations side out of this for them as well. Everything's on GitHub. It's out in the open. It's pretty much the de facto open source tool. And then there's continuation integration with AppLayer. So every pull request that comes through goes through a build process, so we know in advance it's going to actually build. And then when it's all merged in, we can check the project's still healthy and the tests are all running. I haven't got tests on here, but there is a lot of unit test coverage, which might make you happy. We're putting in some integration level testing as well. There's a very old scenario test project that no one's ever run because no one knows how or why it was put there. But if we want to play with that, that's there as well. The whole thing's built on community. So we're very active. We do get pull requests every week pretty much. There's lots of active issue discussions. There's about 300 issues in there, which is intimidating when you come to it. A lot of open source projects are a lot smaller, but the whole kind of idea backlog is in there. So they're all kind of tagged, whether they're kind of backlog items that we don't touch for now, or whether they're priority items to move forward. The active ones are, regularly find people in there chatting. There are stale ones that we're sort of working to clear out as well. But we've had over 1,000 pull requests in the 2.5 years. That's a lot of pull requests that have been merged in. 3,400 commits. 150 contributors around the world have had their hands on it to some degree. Contributors might be one-hit wonders. They might come, do some PR, and then disappear, and we never see them again. That's kind of fine. Then we have the kind of come and go kind of people, which is the more normal case. People have family lives and lives outside of coding, so they come and do a PR, then they go away again, come back in a few months, and that's really good. But they're always involved in the project, usually answering questions on issues that they've been involved in. And one of the big selling points is we have a really friendly lead project owner team and core contributor. We're really keen on making this someone's first open source project that they get involved in, and making that as painless as possible. When I got involved in my first PR, went a bit off-piste. I got a bit carried away, and James Chambers, who's one of the MVPs on the project, kind of messaged me through the issue system, just take it back to this. He offered me some time on Skype if I wanted it to kind of go through how I could refactor it or how we could get the PR merged after we'd rebased it and changes had gone on. So, the team are very willing to give help. And things like the CODEATHON, there's a chance for us to do it in person. But those were numbers. There were a lot of those were outputs. So going back to, we should focus on the outcomes, not the outputs. I wanted just to kind of tell a story that's been passed along the chain. So in 2015, late 2015, early 2016, the Red Cross were doing one of their campaigns. They got a number of homes in the Washington state, kind of smoke alarms installed. I think it was around 1,000 that they achieved. And it was a really successful campaign which they'd run. Fast forward 4 months, and they learned about one of the residents of one of those homes, and they had a house fire. It was in the middle of the night, but luckily the smoke alarm worked. The guy got up, got his entire family out, and they actually managed to ring the fire brigade early enough that they didn't lose the house. They lost a portion that needed rebuilding, but not the entire house. So massive outcome to focus on is that, you know, that really did save their lives, and if we can write software that lets them do more of that, helping with. The will help. That was the kind of why generally. The why personally is I was, when I first heard about it, just excited to play with ASP.NET Core. As I say, it was beta at the time I joined it, so I was following it. I hadn't really had a chance to think of something to try out myself. So I thought, okay, there's a project here I can kind of play with. First heard about it on .NET Rocks, so they mentioned it on the podcast. I thought, okay, I'll go to GitHub and have a look, which I did. Then I got scared because I'd never done open source before, and I didn't know how GitHub worked, and I didn't have an account, and I didn't want to look stupid publicly. So I thought, I'll leave that for a bit. And then I heard about it again, and I thought, actually, no, I really want to do this. So I signed up, and I did that first PR. And as I say, it needed a change, but it did get merged in after a week or so. And after that, it was just PRs in there, something like that, a lot. And all the way through, I've learned things as I've gone. So something that has been on core or mediator libraries, that kind of thing. And a lot of that has then fed back into what I'm doing in Insights. Knew a lot of the pitfalls from this project, so we had a positive benefit on me, and it had a positive benefit for us working, which is here. How can you help? Yeah, it's a large project. We've got the basic functionality there now. There will be more work on going around some of the features that we're planning to add based on the latest test that they did. There was meant to be a 1,000 fire alarm test towards the end of last year. Unfortunately, the Red Cross were dealing with a lot of hurricanes around the end of last year, so that will kind of just have to get delayed. So we're hoping sort of some point early this year, the time will free up that they can kind of take this for a real spin again. From their initial tests, where they've done much fewer numbers in their testing, they found that it worked, and they found that increased the success rate. So they're definitely keen to push it forward. And Humanitarian Toolbox are now actively pushing other charities that might want this technology, so we can start to get more diverse feedback, which is why we're pushing for any local charities that we can maybe start getting involved from here. So in terms of skills, back-end stuff, C# developers, any level, doesn't matter. Front-end developers, anyone that's got design skills as it clearly needs. UX design, UX analysis to find out where is it going wrong, what's really hard to use. And testers to make sure that we are testing the right bits of the application. And for sustainability, we want this as tested as possible, because anytime someone drops off the project, we want to know that if we're touching their code, it's still doing what it did before. So getting involved generally, the best way is just start with GitHub. Check out the GitHub page for that URL there. There's those 300 odd issues. It will seem intimidating at first. Start with the first page or two and just sort of glance through the subject matter and see if anything takes your interest. Dive in and just spend a bit of time seeing what it needs. If you want to know more about HTBox generally, they've got a website, htbox.org. There's also humanitariantoolbox.org, but they realise that not many people can spell humanitarian. They also tweet on at HTBox. There's a kind of weekly stand-up, so if anyone's watched the ASP.NET community stand-up, they kind of modelled it on that. It's a shorter 10-minute show that I try and help out with from time to time. That's on Tuesdays. It's usually kind of late afternoon for us and middle of the night for us. They try and schedule it kind of central time at the moment. We might move that to a more European-friendly time soon as well, so we've got spread. Obviously, I'm sort of recruiting here. The other option is join the CODEATHON. So on the 20th, we'll have Richard Campbell, who's one of the founders, really nice guy, really intelligent guy. He has a huge passion for pushing this project forward, and he's got a lot of contacts in the industry that have been helping us. We've had some famous names involved. We've had John Skeet, who is kind of Stack Overflow's top user ever, who does a lot of datetime stuff, kind of help us with some of those problems. We've had a lot of MVPs involved. Sean Wildermuth, who you might have heard of, he does a lot of ASP.NET Pluralsight courses. He helped with a lot of the early beta migrations. So because of that reach, you're interacting with some really cool people as well. And then on the CODEATHON, we may or may not, I'm not sure yet, we might have James Chambers, who's a fellow MVP from Canada, actually fly over and join us, which will be really good because it will mean we'll have two relatively experienced developers that are able to help out, so we might be able to up them a little bit there. If you haven't already signed up, I think the meetup.com event has now hit the kind of arbitrary limit I picked based on how much space I had and how much capacity I had to help. If you haven't already done that, let me know and I can bump the limit and we can drop you in. Because I'd rather get a lot of Madgex people in. We don't necessarily have to all be in the meeting room if we're running out of space, so we can kind of work it that way. To get prepared for that, you'll need Visual Studio 2017 would be the preferred approach. Here we've got the Pro license, so there's a share that I can get you access to, or Ricky can get you access to, that you can install that. We've installed it on a number of machines. It doesn't break 2015, it doesn't break platform. We're reasonably happy that we're not going to make our lives really painful. If you don't want to install that, or you're working on other systems, you can just use Visual Studio Code or any editor you want, really, as long as you install the SDK manually for .NET Core. If you want to build it and run it locally, you can do that. There's a couple of install guides. I've created bit.ly links for them. There's a kind of general dev guide that talks about installing Visual Studio 2017, and then there's a much longer install guide. You don't need to do everything in the install guide, kind of pick and choose, and maybe just focus on the bits when Visual Studio screams at you. Mostly making sure you've got NPM installed for the package management, making sure you've got the right SDK, which will come down with Visual Studio 2017 anyway. And then you just need to have a GitHub account. You need to follow the guide in the install document about forking the repo and then cloning it down. So we don't have commit rights on the main allReady repo. We create a fork, which is a copy, and then we just work against branches on that, and we can create PRs directly into the main repo from there. Once you've got code on the machine, just try and make sure before the event that it builds, so that, if you're having issues, I can come by and we can try and sort it out. The less time we spend building code and sorting out technical issues in the morning, the more work we can actually achieve. And if you are joining in, send me your GitHub username, either if you've got one now or when you've signed up for it, because we can add you to the project as a contributor, and that means we can just assign you tasks when you're on the day, which makes life easier. People don't go stealing each other. And if you want to be included, we've got a Slack channel for HTBox. You can just send me your email and I'll get one of the guys that's admin access there to get you set up. And that'll be useful because you can have chats. If I'm busy, there'll probably be people in the afternoon available from Canada who can answer questions. We're hoping to get the Red Cross guys to have some availability, so if we've got main questions, we've got some resource. So before we do the code stuff, I've got general questions from anyone. Tech related, we'll do that in a minute. Otherwise,
how many other applications do Humanitarian Toolbox have?
So they've got one other sort of largest one. What's the name of it now?
Is allReady the biggest one?
allReady is the biggest and probably the most publicised. Sure if it's under NDA, I don't think it is. Microsoft MVPs we're going to launch an event globally to all MVPs next week. 50 MVPs to maybe get involved between now and the MVP Summit in March. So it means we may very well find ourselves in a good bunch of MVPs for learning from, getting advice from, and making changes. There's a couple of other smaller apps they do.
Sure.
Again, they focused on the kind of outcome approach. So they could output lots and lots of projects and then just have no one actually working on those. They rather focus on getting a couple pretty complete, pretty mature, and then they're now starting to think about some of the other ideas.
Is there any kind of cross-pollination?
There's not a lot. I've looked at the other repo and then thought I should really focus on my nodes now. But there's various people involved. Obviously, the kind of founders themselves are aware of things across. So if they see something that we've solved on already that could be applied somewhere else, they'll obviously.
Who's the next charity?
We haven't got a name. So Richard's actively keen to kind of find people. He's sort of reaching out within the kind of US charity space. He's suggested to me that he'd love, as we're sort of reasonably involved with this project now, that mean that we're doing something that we can actually improve our area. So if we can get a Brighton-based charity involved in the project, it's a planning application at heart. So whether they have the requirement of kind of the specific use case or not, they could potentially look at this for just improving the flow they've got. And it might be that we talk to them, it doesn't fit their needs, but they've got a really urgent need that we could suggest to toolboxes thing. Quite keen that maybe we do look at seeing if we can get another project, kind of Madgex staff sort of sponsor as people that are doing it, a greenfield thing that maybe is a bit easier to get into. I think that would be a really good place for us all to kind of collaborate towards something good. I had one other point, and I've forgotten it now.
Want to be involved in doing the kind of UX design side of it.
You wouldn't need all of that. So there's a test site up, so I could just send you that URL. So the site's live on the internet. You can play around with some test accounts, which is what I did with my friend the other weekend. We just opened like a general UX discussion issue on the GitHub page, and all you have to have is a GitHub account to kind of comment there. So we've got like the first half of the application. My friend sort of said, "This is bad, this is bad, this is bad." And he said, "I feel like I'm saying there's a lot bad, but functionally it works. But yeah, there's a lot of areas." So the plan there is, try and initially reel out obvious things we could fix quickly that would be good for CODEATHON and things like that, and then look at the sort of larger changes and break those out into subsections and plan them and get them hopefully sketched up. The other point that I'd forgotten around the charity question is if we can find some local charities that are available on the 20th, they've got an opportunity if they want to do like a 10-minute drop in the office, they could speak to Richard in person, kind of charity to charity, and actually really understand what it's about and how he can help. So if the people I'm reaching out to do that.
Who are the users for this app? Who are the actual, like, say in the scenario whereby there's a crisis, and who would be actually use that? This is on the on this app.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of kind of sort of groups of users. There's an overall site admin, which would be someone from HDBox that's just managing the site. There's an org admin, which would be various people within the Red Cross that are the ones doing the planning activities. They can delegate or invite people to do certain roles within that, so they can have people that maybe just manage an individual event or an individual campaign that they're running at that level. And then really the other side of it is volunteers. Whether those are volunteers the Red Cross are already actively engaged with and they just bulk upload into the system, log in, and then they can start assigning things. The front end does provide a kind of public facing page if they want to use it that lets just people search for events near them. So they could say, okay, well, I've got a week off, I'm in Brighton, what events are happening near me that I could try and help with and find things that way. So it could be used as a volunteer recruitment tool. That's probably not its primary use. It's more about kind of using a established organisation.
And are there different views for different users?
In some areas, yeah.
Okay.
So some of those sort of delegated roles will only be able to access some elements of an event. So we have I'm not sure if it was a great idea, it seems to work. I wrote an authorization system for it that kind of allows how we set that up and define various actions that people can do on objects, and then depending on that, the UI kind of shows and hides buttons, blocks access. That's part of the UX work we want to do, is to make those flows really intuitive for those users. Because they're familiar with the app or tech savvy, they might have been invited first time ever. Get in and just do some stuff. I'm thinking maybe at some point Kanban style board might be a logical way to go for some of this. So I can just drag and drop, passing through that flow. Cool. Okay, thank you. If you want to hang around and look at the code for a bit, we've got the room until 3, so I'm happy to kind of just put VS open. We can do that.